welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
What is up?
Not a lot, just enjoying the array of 50-point games that we're getting in the NBA this season. Every time we record a new episode of this, there's a bunch more that are happening in 2019, and gives us something that we're looking forward to talking about once we get there. But right now we're in the post-merger era of 1975 to 1986, talking about the 50-point games of that era, where it becomes I think the theme for this one is going to be there's no dominant player, and 50-point games are going to increasingly become more rare before we start getting a bunch from guys like Michael Jordan and Dominique Wilkins.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be an era of fun names, like different names that we maybe haven't talked about before. But like you said, there's not really like a one guy or a few guys that really dominate it. And the ones that are pretty high on the list aren't necessarily ones that you would consider all-time greats in the same sense that, like, before we had talked about your Wilts and your Rick Barrys and your Jerry Wests and your, Elgin Baylors and those sort of types. This time we're going to talk about like Adrian Dantley, who Adrian Dantley is a great player, but is he, an all-time great? Not on the level that those guys are. So it is definitely a unique era in that sense, but it's a fun era too, because there's a lot of players that we maybe don't have other opportunities to talk about that fit in perfectly in this show.
Right. And as you mentioned, the guys who have the most during these years, Adrian Dantley, George Gervin, Bernard King each have 6 50-plus point games. Bob McAdoo and Pete Maravich all have 4, and all these guys are excellent players, great players, but none of them really, other than maybe George Gervin, is really like someone you would think of as like a top 50 all-time player. They just
right. Exactly.
It's not that level of guys who are getting these, which is definitely interesting. And yeah, in this era, there are 67 total 50-plus point games over these 12 seasons. And they account for 0.58% of all games are 50-plus point games. And if we look at this from the other eras that we're talking about in our show so far, so from 49 to 61, it was 0.94% of all total games. This is, by the way, regular season, not counting postseason rates. Then from 62 to 66, which of course the Wilt Chamberlain dominant era, 7% of all games were 50-plus point games. Obviously, Wilt accounting for most of that. And then the last show we looked at, 67 to 74, 1.06%. So definitely lowering the rate, but still pretty frequent. But here we go. That's going to be cut basically in half to 0.58%. So I find that kind of interesting. Part of that is, we're growing into, but I was going to say we're going to have more games, but that's actually not really true, because we're about to merge leagues and there's going to be fewer games. So interesting to, we'll talk about some of the players and some of the key things, and maybe we'll figure out a reason why there was this decline, during this era in particular, because it wasn't necessarily a much slower paced league.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't know that I can quite right now put our fingers on it all the way. I mean, I guess, yeah, like you said, it wasn't like there were some teams, and we're going to talk about some teams and some players and some years where the pace was still pretty high and the scoring was still pretty high. It just, for whatever reason, it just wasn't. I don't know. It's just a period where and I think part of it might be that some of the top players, your Magic Johnson types who kind of emerges in this era, your Larry Birds, of course, are not known as necessarily those types of scorers. Before we had guys like a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who would obviously be, an unbelievable scorer, and Wilt Chamberlain, of course, and guys like Rick Barry and Jerry West, who I mentioned before, guys that were known for scoring outbursts or whatever. Whereas now we're moving into an era where the top stars are, someone like a Magic Johnson, who is not going to, pour in 50 points on a regular basis. He's going to do more of the assisting, the rebounding, kind of all around game in a sense. But yeah, it is unique, and I don't know that we have like an answer right away for why that 50-point games did slow down as much as they did, because the league wouldn't get into its crawl until basically the 90s, when it would really become like, all right, now like these teams are playing for 89 points a game, and that's when it really slows down. We see hints of that throughout this time period, but not all the way quite yet. So it is definitely unique that it fell as much as it did.
Yeah, and actually now I do have the pace stats up, and they start in 74 is the first year we get official, and in 74 it's 107.8. And then by 82, we're down to 100.9. And then we're kind of from 81 through 86 here were in the 101s, 102. So it does dip a bit, and then it's going to basically stay around 199 until it really dips, as you talked about, in the mid 90s into around 90, even 89 in 1 year. So and basically up until more recent seasons has been in the 90s. So there is a decrease, although it is still a much faster paced league than we have seen really since the late 80s. Even up until now, when the pace has gone up again, it's still it was a much faster league in that time. But again, it was a league that was slowing down a bit. So that would I think would explain at least part of it. And I think what you're talking about is some of the best players of the era weren't necessarily the guys who were going to be having 50-point games all the time. Magic Johnson obviously never had one, and Bird only really had a few. Those guys were doing a lot of other things other than scoring, where the guys here were mostly known as primarily scorers who didn't necessarily always play a complete game. So,
exactly. Yeah.
So let's dive into the seasons a little bit. The 75 season, we still have two leagues: the 6 50-plus point games in the NBA, 5 in the ABA. That's 0.086%. This is the last year of double-digit 50-point games until 1987. And then we have 3 new players in the club. We have George Gervin, who's going to, as we talked about, have quite a few of these. Marvin Barnes, of course, famous ABA name, known for his legendary exploits, mostly off the court, but a few on the court. And then Gail Goodrich.
Yeah, so we'll start with Gail Goodrich here, nickname Stumpy, which is an unfortunate name given to him by Elgin Baylor for his short legs. He was only 6'1", so man, I'm only like 6 foot. I don't know what would Elgin call me. I'm afraid. I don't know. I'm afraid to know that. But I was also not a professional basketball player. But started as a reserve with the Lakers. Then he became a star with the Suns. He would move on to the Suns and then go back to LA, and that's really where he emerged, I think, as kind of an all-time great here. Was a leading scorer on the 1972 Lakers title team. Team, of course, won 33 in a row and set the record with 69 wins, only broken pretty recently. Or broken, of course, by the Bulls, and then broken then later by the Warriors. Was first team All-NBA in 1974, oldest of one-time only first-teamers at age 30 as well, which I think is a kind of a unique stat, but I guess it makes sense that, if you haven't become an all-timer, a first-teamer by the age of 30, you're probably not going to be. So, yeah, just interesting again. That Goodrich... Then 31, he dropped about 10 pounds for the 1974-75 season, got back to his college weight. So good for him. I don't know if I've gotten back to my college weight or if I ever can, but we'll see what happens there. Had a salary dispute with the Lakers in the 1976 season. Team ended up fining him $40,000 for missed time, and Goodrich later sued the team for back pay. One of the first major free agents to jump teams as well, because he then would go on to sign with the New Orleans Jazz, team with Pistol Pete Maravich. Unfortunately, he missed most of his first Jazz season with an Achilles injury. And unfortunately, as you might know, while you're making that connection, they're like, wait a minute, he went to the Jazz? Yeah, yes, one of the compensation picks for the Jazz signing him ended up being Magic Johnson. So I think the Lakers were okay with that. But just another one of the very unfortunate things of the New Orleans Jazz history. When he retired in 1979, Goodrich was 11th all-time in scoring and 10th all-time in assists, what I think is a little surprising as well. I would never have thought of him as being at least that 11th all-time in scoring. Definitely seems to jump out. When the Lakers retired his jersey number in 1996, he had jersey number 25. Eddie Jones, who was wearing it at the time, changed his number to number 6. So that is Gail Goodrich. Are you surprised by the 11th all-time in scoring when he retired?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I knew he was obviously a very good scorer, but yeah, to be 11th and 10th all-time in scoring and assists, I didn't think of him necessarily as having that longevity, but he was a fairly effective player, into his mid-30s. His first couple years as a reserve for the Lakers, he didn't really gain much in the contest. He was a little bit like Havlicek in that respect, where Havlicek was was buried pretty deep on the bench on those loaded Celtics teams for a year or two, and then and then emerged soon afterwards. So Goodrich kind of had the same thing, but yeah, he was definitely carrying those teams. As West retired before Kareem kind of came in. At least on the guard end, he was doing a lot of the scoring, and obviously was a pretty good playmaker too to be 11th all time in assists. So. Yeah, it did surprise me a little bit for sure.
Yeah, and then of course, as we mentioned, the New Orleans Jazz, signing him. Hey, we got this 5-time All-Star. We're teaming up with Pete Maravich. Things are going to go well. Yeah, give the compensation pick to the Lakers. Who cares? And then it's Magic Johnson, which is one of many unfortunate things that the New Orleans Jazz went through in their era. But again, like at the time, like you can defend that. I mean, Goodrich was slowing down a little bit. Obviously, he was 32 after been playing for the last 10 years or whatnot. But for the Jazz to try to put him together and try to make one last thing, and then of course he has his Achilles injury. Pete Maravich goes through his injuries and stuff. So on paper, like I get it, but yeah, it does in hindsight look kind of bad because Magic Johnson ended up being that pick. So if the Lakers chose someone crappy, then nobody would care. But if they picked Magic Johnson, so
yeah, and the competition wasn't necessarily their choice. I mean, that was kind of chosen for them too.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. That was in the infancy of free agency. The commissioner was making those decisions. I mean, sometimes the teams did agree on something. Sometimes it was the commissioner who ended up making the ultimate decision. So, and they weren't like excited about having guys be free agents. So the commissioner's penalties ended up, being the competition ended up being pretty heavy in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Thankfully, though, thankfully in sports, though, we have gotten over that, and now owners are perfectly happy with players being free agents and compensating them for what they deserve and making sure that they get as much of a slice of the pie as they deserve. So thank God we are over those the stripes between management and labor. So absolutely,
So this was going through some of the games of this season. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had 2 in January of 75. His second was the last 50-plus triple-double in the NBA until the 2017 season. This was the last 50-plus point game of his career. This was the 10th of his career. He was still with the Bucks at this point, so he never did it with the Lakers. And at the time, he was one of only 4 players with 10-plus, 50-plus point games along with Wilt, Baylor, and Rick Barry. So he had 50, 15, and 11 in this game, also 3 blocks. I was slightly surprised that he never had 50 with the Lakers.
It's still nuts because he's going to play another 13 years or whatever, and he doesn't ever. I mean, obviously those last few years in the Lakers, it would be very odd for Kareem to just explode for 50. But I mean, he had another real solid 5, 6, 7 years of being a dominant player and dominant scorer for the Lakers, and he never got to 50 again, which is just fascinating because this is it in 1975. As a member of the Bucks, it's just that blew my mind. Also, the last 50-point triple double until 2017 too. That blew my mind. That nobody from 1975 until 2017 could do it. That's just for whatever reason. I don't know why. I was just and then for it to be Kareem, that's the guy who did it. Is just I don't know. Of all the all the combo guards and all the small forwards and guard forwards and all that stuff that would get 50 that we're going to talk about over the next few episodes. For Kareem to be the last one until 2017, I don't know, for whatever reason that surprised me.
Yeah, and Kareem, interestingly enough, he didn't really have a huge amount of 40-plus point games with the Lakers either, although he had a couple that were in the high 40s against Houston, of all teams, in 1986, before that playoff series that they lost. He had 48 points in one of his last great games. We talked about that in a recent episode of looking at some of the best last great games of all-time greats, and so he did get close and had a couple random ones when he's 38, 39 years old, but obviously didn't quite get there. And like we said, a lot of those Lakers teams, especially when Magic comes along, you got Worthy, you got a lot of guys who can score. I mean, they were getting the ball to him, and he was obviously scoring 30-plus point games a lot, but he didn't really Kareem. Part of his greatness was almost his steadiness. He was more he didn't necessarily have the high highs and the low lows, but he was just always going to get you steady to high scoring numbers, but not tremendously high scoring numbers, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely.
Yeah. Next, we got Rick Barry in January of 75, 55 points. He also had 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 7 steals, which set a NBA record for steals in a 50-plus point game. Of course, steals only recently being tracked by the NBA. I believe this was the second year that was the case. Jordan would break this record in 1987. This was his 20th career 50-plus point game and his first after age 30. So, we talked about a lot in the last episode because he had he had the most 50-plus point games in the previous episode, but again, I think higher up on these boards than I'd really appreciated before we really dove into this.
Rick Barry remains one of kind of these weird sort of underappreciated guys, and it popped up a little bit this week as well. We're recording this the week that Devin Booker had his back-to-back 50-point games. And I think the stat was that he was the youngest since Rick Barry or something like that, or I forget exact stat where Booker and Rick Barry got related. I think it was that one, if I remember correctly. And it led to I was kind of reading through the tweets, because we have like a little, I have my tweet deck, I have something for 50-point games, so I can like chime in anytime anybody talks about 50-point games. But hey, we have a series about them, because I'm nothing if not a promoter. But it was just interesting to see people be like, oh, Rick Barry, huh? And then like you could see in the tweets, like people would start like maybe going to Rick Barry's basketball reference page or whatever, and then looking at it and going, hey, Rick Barry's actually like really, really good. Like I don't know why he gets lost to history as much as he did. And I know we even tweeted out our original episode about Rick Barry, which I think was the first episode we ever did too. So but for whatever reason, I don't know why. We talk about this every week on the show, and I guess we don't underrate him, but it seems historically, like anytime you read about Rick Barry, it seems just it historically just doesn't get maybe the love he should get as a scorer too, as not only just like kind of an all-around player, but a really, really great all-time scorer.
Yes, and of course this was during the year in which he won his only championship with the Warriors. This one marred slightly by only a 51 true shooting in the game. Usually you're going to get these, they're going to be above the 60s, somewhere in the 70s and 80s. This one was a little bit below average in terms of that, 23 of 49 from the field, but still obviously he's putting up numbers in a lot of different categories, and and led his team to a win in that situation. So not too bad. Next, we have George Gervin with the first of his 50-plus point games, as we talked about. The first also in Spurs history, and he is the fourth George to score 50-plus in a game. So joined George Mikan, of course, George McGinnis, and George Yardley.
That's good. The ongoing George. Are we gonna? Did Paul George ever have in 50? And would he be eligible, or are we only doing first names? I mean, I understand if it's only first names. I get it. I'm just trying to keep the leaderboards going, because I think it might be over. I think we might be done after Gervin, right? I'm blanking on other prominent Georges that scored 50 points.
Are there going to be any more Georges? Yeah, no. And by the way, Paul George has never had 50.
There you go. Okay, so he's not even eligible.
Right, which is a little surprising, actually. For sure. Yeah. It's so going back to my yes. So then we have a couple from Julius Erving, both in February of 1975. The first was on Valentine's Day, 4 overtimes against the San Diego Conquistadors. He had 63 points, 23 rebounds, and 8 assists in this game. In 4 overtimes, it tied Bob Cousy's record for most minutes in a 50-plus point game, 66 minutes. We don't have minutes recorded in every instance, so but although again obviously 4 overtimes is a pretty rare, so that would be unlikely to have been equaled in that case. And then 8 days later, on his 25th birthday, also against the Conquistadors, he had 51, 19, and 4, also 4 blocks, and he had 86% true shooting, which sets a record for best true shooting in a 50-point game. So
yeah, that's that's a really great night too when you look at the numbers.
Yes.
I mean, 19 of 23 from the field. I mean, that is good.
Right.
That's living. And that is a good one. And then also 13 of 15 from the free throw line too. So just it's a nice day at the against the Conquistadors in San Diego. So
right. And we got Marvin Barnes in March of 75, 54 points, 23 rebounds, only 50 plus for the Spirits franchise, at least when they were in St. Louis, and the only one of his career, which not that surprising given his short career, but if you think of the legend of he had established in the ABA where he could just do all these crazy things, just could show up at the arena, right as game is beginning, and then drop huge numbers. You would think, oh yeah, he had quite a few 50-plus point games, but only one there. So although it's certainly a good one.
Yeah, it is interesting because he averaged 24 points per game in both of his ABA seasons. So yeah, you would think that that's pretty prolific scoring there. 2-time All-Star, of course. That maybe he would have run into a few more of the 50-point games, but unfortunately that did not happen. And then obviously his NBA career didn't go quite as well as his ABA career because things were a little bit more strict there, and he was a little less interested in following rules by that point. So things just kind of unfortunately didn't. Because you look at him as a guy who at in his 2 ABA years, he's 22 and 23 years old. You're thinking, man, this guy's in the peak of his career, and if he got things together could really become one of the greats. And then obviously just did not work out that way, unfortunately, for old Bad News Barnes. But at least we have those 2 ABA seasons to look at. So
Yeah. So Bob McAdoo with another 50-20 game in March of 75. Gil Goodrich, as we mentioned, 53 late in March of 75. George McGinnis with the last 50-point game of his career. And this is the only known instance of an ABA 50-plus point game triple-double. So Kareem had the last one for the NBA, and then McGinnis had the last one total until 2017 in the ABA. He had 51, 17 rebounds, 10 assists, 3 blocks, and 6 fouls. However, I'd forgotten briefly until I thought more about it, is the ABA, of course, had no foul outs, so he did not foul out in this game. So there are, and it's we'll get into it in just
I don't
a
know
minute.
if I ever knew that until just right now. Yeah. That's awesome.
We'll get into it in, I believe, a little bit later. But it is very rare for there to be a foul out in a 50-plus point game. Obviously, you're gonna have to play most of the game to get 50-plus points. So,
I wonder. So there had to be some. Man, there had to be some sort of rule in place because you can't just have a goon go out there and just foul like crazy.
You get technical fouls after 6, I believe.
Oh, okay. So you could stay in the game, but it's a terrible idea to continue to foul. So I don't mind that actually. That's kind of okay.
Because a lot of people like that idea. Yeah,
because then it kind of takes a little bit of the aggressiveness away when a guy's got he's up against the foul out or whatever. Because you don't want to lose that guy. But there's some times where you'd be like, yeah, we'll take a T. We'd rather keep Dikembe Mutombo in the game and take a T instead of worry about having him out of the game. So okay. I guess I enjoy that. That's fine. I was just thinking of the idea of just anarchy, which would make sense in the ABA for there just to not be any foul outs and just guys just shoving each other. And he's got 8 fouls and it's okay. So that makes a little sense about the T. But yeah, there's times where you'll take a T to keep your guy in the game.
And then to wrap things up in 75, Bob McAdoo with 50 and 21. And this is in the playoffs against the Washington Bullets, the 18th in playoff history. And the Bullets played the Braves played the Bullets very tough in that series, although the Bullets ended up winning it and going to the NBA Finals, but they would lose to Rick Barry's Warriors.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. All right, so new year, a final year for the ABA in 1976. We have 3 50-point games in the NBA, 2 in the ABA. We are down to 0.48%, which is a pretty dramatic decline there. There are fewer ABA games because the league was contracting at that point. And then the new players to the 50-plus point game club are David Thompson and then the Warriors' Phil Smith.
Yeah, let's get on with Phil Smith because he's one guy that always kind of pops up on whenever you look at most ridiculous or most random 50-point scores. A lot of times you do see Phil Smith go up there, but he had a pretty good career, so we'll talk about it here. Second round pick of the Warriors in 1975, one of 2 rookies and 7 players under 26 in the rotation of that championship team, which is pretty awesome to know how they just kind of put together this incredible young duo and stuff. But he had been a local star with the University of San Francisco as well, same college of Bill Russell. Till he emerged as a starter in 1976, he shared leading scorer duties with Rick Barry and was second team All-NBA for the best regular season team. He was known for his post-up game. Coach Al Adel said that he would take people inside and just jump over them. All-star in 1976 and 77. By then, the Warriors still had Barry, Smith, Jamal Wilkes, and 5 under 28 players from that title team. And they had added future stars like Gus Williams and Robert Parrish as well. So that seems like, man, that's a dynasty in the making. Yeah, that didn't quite work because they managed to squander all that away. Of course, Parrish sent away and just nothing made out of any of those guys. And you made a little note here that we could really use a book on this team because it is pretty awesome that they win a title, they keep adding talent, they keep adding talent. Like you would think this is the dominant team of the late 70s and the early 80s, and it wasn't because it was the Warriors, and you don't remember the Warriors in the early 80s because they found a way to just completely and then pretty much be bad for the next 2 decades until Steph Curry, until this modern era. So it's Warriors basketball, unfortunately. But it's a good little note there about the team. Yeah, it's a fascinating team when you look at how much good talent they had and how much good young talent they had. That you would assume, yeah, this team's ready to go for the next 10 years.
Yeah, Barry obviously was getting older by then, so he wouldn't necessarily have been able to carry them, but they had other guys, Wilkes, obviously, who went to the Lakers in free agency, and some other guys who they lost. They certainly seemed to have the talent where they could have been competitive for quite a long time. And even in 77, there were so many good teams of that season. I mean, obviously the Blazers get so much attention there, but the Warriors were really good. the Sonics were emerging a bit. They would obviously get really good the next year and go to the finals. There was a lot of teams. I always say that breaks of the game definitely could have been written about several teams of the late 70s, because the Blazers were a fascinating team, but there were so many other fascinating teams of that era as well. And it's about the NBA as a whole. So he dives into a lot of those stories, but the Warriors are definitely one that, there's so many interesting players that kind of pass through there, and such an interesting story, of that team. And I think Barry, as we've talked about plenty of times, is a guy who, his career could use so much more exploration, because it is fascinating in so many ways.
Absolutely. We'll get back to Phil Smith here. He unfortunately ruptured his Achilles tendon before the 1980 season, and was really never quite the same after that. He played 4 more seasons with the Clippers and the Sonics. Al Atlas, who we said again, his coach, said had it not been for the Achilles injury, I really believe that he would have been one of the greatest players in the game over time. Unfortunately, Phil Smith died of cancer at age 50 in 2002. He had a 5-year battle with bone marrow cancer at that point too. And then real quickly, you got this from the San Francisco Gate, sfgates.com. His former USF coach, Bob Gallard, fondly recalled a humorous incident that in 1975 when Smith was wed to his college girlfriend, Angela, who he met at USF. It was a rare hot day in San Francisco, and he was about to take his vows. Smith passed out and had to be propped up by his Warriors teammates, which is awesome. Gallard says, I couldn't stop laughing. I told him, Phil, you've made every clutch shot, defended the best scorers to become the go-to guy. Now here, all you had to do was say, I do, and you fainted. And he just looked at me with that sheepish grin. So that's pretty awesome there.
Yeah.
I like the getting propped up. Like, was he awake, or was he just kind of like, that's
a slow woozy, just need some help standing up, I guess, yeah.
Was it the hot day, Phil? I mean, let's be honest. How hot really was it, Phil? Or were you just a little nervous about this whole wedding thing? But it's pretty great.
I understand.
Story. Yeah, no, I get it. I was nervous myself.
I get it. Yeah, sure. I said, instead of saying with this ring, I said with this thing, Ivy wed. So,
well, it's a thing. You're not incorrect. You're not incorrect. So,
right.
Yeah, when I proposed to Michelle, I just forgot to say anything. I just proposed, and she was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh yeah, right, yeah."
Yeah.
like I forget that's what you're supposed to do is
right.
do the thing.
Actually ask. Yeah,
right.
But
it's tough. Yeah. It's not like the movies, people. It's hard.
No, it's challenging. Yes. So looking at the games from '76, as we mentioned, there are only 5 of them. Bob McAdoo early on has another 50-20 game. It was his 4th 50-point game of that time. Also, the 4th time he had reached 50-20, which he has more 50-20s than anyone other than Will Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor. So I was a little surprised by that.
Yeah, I am. I'm a little. Yeah, it's certainly with this year, of course, having as few as they do. But yeah, I'm a little surprised as well that McAdoo has as many of those as he does. He would not.
Right.
If you had told me, hey, who's got 50 and 20s, like. Yeah, Wilt obviously would be up there. Baylor would be up there. A bunch of other guys would be up there. But I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that I would come up with Bob McAdoo as kind of the first one, or one of the first 5 names that I would give you.
Yeah, and I guess I think of McAdoo as more of an outside big man as opposed to an inside big man. Although obviously on defense he's guarding. He's going to be closer to the rim than he would be on offense.
Right.
A lot of the offensive rebounds, but yeah. I just thought that was interesting. And then Phil Smith, as we mentioned, when he had 51, his career high up to that point was 27. So
right, and that's why he appears on a lot of those lists. When you see people that just kind of do basic sort of, hey, here's the most surprising 50-point game scorers. Phil Smith pops up a lot because he wasn't but he was a very good player too, and that's one of the things why I kind of challenge it a little bit. I'm like, nah, I don't know if he's that much of oh my god, an anomaly. Tracy Murray, yes, Tracy Murray's an anomaly. Tony Delk is an anomaly. We'll talk about those. We talked about those guys, but Phil Smith. Maybe unfairly gets kind of lumped in there, even though he was, a 2-time All-Star. But he wasn't known as this. And I think we talked about him a little bit in our unlikely 50-point scorer thing, is that he just wasn't a dude that you thought could get 50. He was a very good scorer that could do, 25, 30. But the idea that he would just explode for 50 kind of seemed rare at that time. So.
And when it happened, he didn't have much of a reputation. This helped cement his reputation as a really good scorer, really good guard. He was emerging over a month or two before then. I mean, he hadn't even had 20 points in a game up until I think late in his rookie season, or early on in the 76 season, and then he just kept pushing it until he got 50, and then had some big scoring binges over the next couple of seasons, which we'll dive into. Next, we have Julius Erving in January of 76. The last 50-point game of his career, as we mentioned on a previous episode, never had one in the NBA. In this one, he had 51 points, 12 rebounds, 8 assists, and 4 blocks. This is against the Spurs, actually, and this was again in the ABA in the last season of the in the ABA. And then David Thompson, January of 1976, his first of his career. This is the last ABA 50-point game in its history. And then he had 50 points, 0 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals. It is the first that we have in our database. Now, we don't have rebounds for some of the games, so it's possible that it happened otherwise, but it's the first that we know of where there were no rebounds. And he was a 17 of 20 from the field and 16 of 19 from the free throw line. His true shooting percentage was 88%, which is at the time was the best in history. He had just eclipsed Julius Erving's mark that was set earlier in the year. Before then, I think Will Chamberlain had set a record. So and that would last until 1995.
Yeah, it's an awesome game he had too. As far as the 0 rebounds, though, I did want to just briefly kind of look at because that's like 0 rebound. Like, you got to get lucky and just one bounce into your lap or whatever, but apparently not. Other ones, Damon Stoudemire in 2005 had 54 points, 0 rebounds, only 1 assist too. So Damon was just going out there to feast. He wasn't looking to do anything else, which is weird considering it's Damon Stoudemire. Like, how did you not get more than 1 assist? Like, aren't you the point guard? But whatever. Kobe Bryant, 61 points, 2009, 0 rebounds, 0 rebounds as well. And then Damian Lillard, 2016, 51 points, with 0 rebounds as well. But he also had 7 assists and 6 steals, but 0 rebounds. That's a very unique game here. But yeah, that David Thompson game, I mean, 17 of 20 from the field, 16 of 19 from the free throw line. That's feasting pretty well. But how do you not get 1 rebound? Like, does it just have to happen? Like, don't you just like?
Right.
I guess like what actually benefits his like lack of rebounding is that he didn't miss any shots. Because like you know the easiest way to probably get a rebound is like you follow up on your own miss or whatever. But he didn't miss any shots. He missed only 3. So that's probably a big reason why. But it's pretty interesting. And he celebrated my birthday in 1976 too with this 50-point game. Unfortunately, I hadn't been born yet, or I wasn't going to be born for another 11 years. But he knew.
Hey, he knew. He knew that someday, you were going to be around. He wanted to celebrate that.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it. So.
Yeah, he very much so. And then Bob McAdoo, last 50-point game of his career, 52, 11, and 3. And then because of McAdoo, the Braves actually have more 50-plus point games than the Hornets, Grizzlies, Pelicans, and Clippers, if you consider since 1980, and Raptors, and as many as the Mavs, Wolves, and Sonics, not counting the Thunder, in all of their histories. So
that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. Yeah,
right. So that's kind of funny how that worked out.
Oh, that's nuts. Yeah, that's. Buffalo Braves, but I guess it again, like we said, it makes sense because like the Hornets really kind of come up in an era where it's pretty slow. These days they should be catching up a little bit now, but they're a lot of those teams are not great right now. But yeah, the Pelicans should have a few more. But I get with their weird history. Never mind. I don't want to get into the Hornets Pelicans thing. We're not going to do it right now.
That's fine.
We're not going to do it right now. We're not going to do it. But the Sonics should have more. The Wolves should have more. And the Mavs should have more. That's what I'll say. So
right. All right. Fair enough. So. Going into 1977, the first year, of course, after the merger, and we only have 5. Although the percentage increases because of there being fewer games, 0.55%. And Pete Maravich has 4 of the 5, as he had a real big scoring binge between December 14th, 1976, and March 18th, 1977. Included in this is on December 25th, so not your birthday, but close to your birthday, where he set his career high, 68 points, also 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. He fouled out on a pretty dubious call, or he might have broken 70 in this game, and it's only the 3rd recorded instance of a player fouling out in a 50-plus point game.
Yeah, that's why we need that ABA. We need those no foul outs here. We could have had 70 here, guys.
Right.
So yeah, I'm now team no foul outs. So especially with this, knowing that we could have gotten 70 from Pete Maravich here, and then maybe even a little bit more as well. I mean, there's he's playing 48 minutes in this game or whatnot, or 43 minutes I should say. I'd been interested to see what he would have done in those last few minutes had he stayed in the game. So that stinks.
Absolutely, yes. Phil Smith also has his second and final 50-plus point game in his career in December of 1976 as well. So he's one of the surprises, but he's actually on the list twice.
Yeah.
So yes. And then this is the first time that there are no new members to the club since 1967. So because Maravich and Smith both had previous instances. So not a whole lot to say about this era. I don't know. Again, maybe it's because of the way that talent is distributed in the league where, this is an era of a whole lot of parity. So maybe your teams are slightly more balanced and there's less opportunity for teams to, have these big games. Obviously, Maravich and the Jazz are kind of an exception to that because it's kind of the Pete show for the most part, especially with Gail Goodrich sidelined for this season. But this was probably Maravich's best, most complete season where he really kind of fulfilled the promise that he had that he could as a player. 77, 78, and then kind of 78 season was derailed by an injury where they could have made the playoffs and unfortunately was unable to carry them. But this was kind of these two seasons were really where he kind of fulfilled his promise the most before injuries and other issues caught up with him.
Yeah, there's definitely this does feel like the most complete, like you said, Maravich year. This feels like what he could have been or should have been or what people want him to be or whatever kind of narrative you want to have around Pete Maravich. Like this felt like the year where he kind of put it all together and it felt like a year where okay, things are maybe getting stabilized here a little bit in New Orleans. Maybe things are going to be a little bit better for this franchise and whatnot. And then obviously it would not go that way. And many other issues would kind of spring up here. But it does feel like the first year where that promise is really fulfilled and it feels like, all right, the things that this team has done and this franchise has done has finally paid off, and Maravich could be one of the NBA's emerging stars. But of course, that would not come to be. So
yes. So I think before we dive into the most famous moment of this season, I think we should go through, since it happens right at the end. We should talk about the games that happened in '78. Rick Barry has his first 50 plus as 1975 in the beginning of the 78 season. And Calvin Murphy, he's breaks through with a 57 point performance, also 6 rebounds, 2 assists. Interesting for a guard of his size to have 6 rebounds and only 2 assists. But there you go. That was the first for the Rockets actually in Houston. And then Rick Barry has his 22nd and last 50-plus point game in March of '78. And at age 33 years and 362 days, so very close to his 34th birthday, he breaks Sam Jones's mark as the oldest player to score 50 in a game. And that would last until Alex English would break it in 1989.
Yeah, that's good. Get some old guys in there. Yeah, and it's not. And we have a little bit of stats later about the ages of people, scoring 50 plus points per game. And it definitely skews young as you would imagine. So this is definitely a great accomplishment for Barry.
Yeah, he also had 9 points and 9 assists in that game, so very narrowly misses a triple double. John Williamson also breaks into the club. We'll have more on him in a little bit, but he is the first post-merger ABA player to score 50 in the NBA. Becomes the 60th player ultimately to cross that mark. And this happens against his former team, and we'll talk more about the circumstances about that against the Pacers in just a little bit. And then we get into the famous night of David Thompson and George Gervin.
Oh yes, we got to get to this one. This is a famous one. One of the more famous. I don't know. I always think of this moment like I love this game and I love this idea and I love everything about it of George Gervin and David Thompson having historic scoring bidges on the same day trying to go for the scoring title. I like this. Like what are your thoughts on this? Like of guys being like, no, we got to just like feed this guy so he can win the scoring title. Do you like it or dislike it? Because I could see some people not really enjoying it because it is kind of like feasting on like personal accomplishments. But I love it. I mean, I'm all for it. Where do you kind of stand on it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally for it and cool with it, but it also like depends a little bit on circumstances. Like, I mean, these were obviously games where there was really nothing on the line, so it didn't necessarily matter if the teams won or lost. When you're getting to the kind of point where like your team is fouling in situations that don't make sense, so you can get another possession, so you can get.
Is there a recent example you're trying to bring up here, or what are we discussing?
Maybe
here?
there might be some examples of that. We get it. Yeah, that would actually might be a good show topic or subtopic at some point to get into a few of the circumstances where that has happened. Now, it didn't really happen in either one of these cases.
No.
These were just the guy got the ball, he scored. I mean, in both cases, their teams ended up losing. One of them was a very close game. And it was competitive down the stretch. The other one was more of a blowout. But yeah, I mean, I think in either one of these cases, I don't see anything wrong competitively in that situation. I think if you're trying to, pervert the spirit of the game in some respects, I don't think just like giving it to a guy and say, hey, you score and let's do this is inherently doing that. But there are times within that strategy you can do things that you kind of take away from it, which I think would be bad. But yeah, I don't have any issues with how either one of these things went down. I think in the context it was perfectly defensible in both cases.
Absolutely, yeah, and so we'll get into these here a little bit. They were 14 points apart going into this day. Thompson 73 points for him. Nuggets were in Detroit for a day game. No TV crews for what seemed like a meaningless game on the same day. So John Havlicek was playing his final game as well. So they decided, yeah, that's the thing we want to get some some publicity on. And who cares about this Nuggets Detroit Pistons game? And I get it, but yeah, it didn't work out, unfortunately, because there is no footage of this game, which just absolutely stinks, is that we can't see this one. His coach, David Thompson's coach, Larry Brown, talked to Thompson before the game and asked him if he really wanted to go for it. Thompson said he just wanted to play, and whatever happened would happen. Well, what happened was Thompson had 32 points in the first quarter, setting an all-time record, and 53 points in the first half. So it seemed like, hey, you know what? At this point, let's just go for the the record here. Let's see what we can do here. He went 13 of 14 from the field, being blocked on one dunk attempt. He was 6 of 6 from the free throw line in the first quarter. He made 20 of his first 21 shots. He was absolutely on fire. He played 43 out of 48 minutes. He said, when I came out for those 5 minutes, my teammates were treating me like the way baseball players treat pitchers throwing a no-hitter late in the game. They wouldn't talk to me. They wouldn't even sit near me, fearing some sort of basketball voodoo jinx. So that's pretty awesome. A crowd of 300 people, 300 people showed up at Denver's Stapleton International Airport that Sunday night. Bob King, executive VP of the Nuggets, was the first to greet David Thompson and Larry Brown as they exited the plane. Carl Scheer was there as well. As I was walking down the runway, microphones and tape recorders were being thrust in my face. Thompson said, I just feel great being associated with a player like Wilt Chamberlain, he said, as signing autographs on all sides. So, of course, he gets that big 73 points. He gets the scoring title, so he thinks, kind of. He's feeling all nice and good and feeling all great and all right. Yeah, like had a hot first quarter, a hot first half, scored 73, all-time great scoring binge. But there's another game going on. George Gervin is going to play in New Orleans in the Superdome, and he is going to score 63 points. Doug Moe was the coach of the Nuggets, of course, and of course he and Larry Brown were close friends and rivals. Gervin needed 53 points to win the scoring title. He missed his first 6 shots, so he kind of assumed, this isn't going to happen tonight. Sorry, guys, not working. But then Gervin says that Pete Maravich, injured and on the bench, was cheering him on and wanted him to break the record. So Gervin would go and break Thompson's record for points in a quarter with 33, and also had 53 by halftime. Thompson said he tried to get the game on the radio, and once he heard that Gervin had 53 points by halftime, he pretty much knew it was all over. Once Gervin had 59, he asked the coach if he could get a few more just in case they miscounted, which I think is an incredible story. So then he got, of course, to the 63. So I love that because there's a little mini doc that you link to. I guess we could try to link to it in the show doc as well, where Gervin says like, yeah, I got to the 59, but I wasn't sure if they miscalculated. So he asked if he could just get just a few more points there just to make sure. So that's how he gets to the 63, which I find an incredible story here. Gervin took 49 shots in 33 minutes, which is 1.48 field goal attempts per minute, even more than Wilt's 100, which is at 1.3. And both Gervin and Thompson, we should say, were inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1996. So fitting that they came in together as well. But yeah, this is an all-time great game and an all-time great basketball moment to me too. It's awesome knowing these two dudes are just going at it. Would have been better if we had like TV so we could kind of see if they're playing at the same time, so you could see them kind of go back and forth, or the announcers kind of talk about it. But
right.
Still works. It kind of works a little bit too in that mystery too, with Thompson not knowing and getting in the car and everyone's like got champagne and he's like, I don't know yet. Like let's wait and see. But yeah, it's just an all time fun moment in NBA history.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it would be awesome if there was footage, but in some respects, it's almost better that there isn't, just because you
the
can
legend
use your
of it.
imagination for
Yeah,
what
the legend
happened.
of it works a little bit better. Where Gervin, kind of gets word, some whispers, hey, Thompson scored 73, or you know what I mean, like a little bit, because like if it was out in the open and they knew and everyone was on their phones, everybody was recording it, it'd be fun. But like I like the idea too, where it's just like they're not quite sure, exactly. Like Thompson's in a car, like trying to find the game on the radio, and then someone finds him and says, hey, Gervin's got like it kind of adds to the legend that maybe there isn't any TV and there isn't any radio, or there's radio for it, but no TV footage of it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'd be really cool to be able to, of course, have seen it and have been there, and it'd be awesome. But it's almost like one of those things where, like, if you saw, them always going to these guys and these guys just jacking up all these shots, especially like Gervin. Like Gervin just took an incredible amount of shots. I mean, he had 49 shots in 33 minutes. That might not be quite as fun to watch if you actually have to experience it. But although seeing guys, the funny thing is Gervin breaking Thompson's record for points in a quarter that he had set 5 hours earlier. That kind of thing is really cool. After Thompson had broken Wilt's record that had been set 14 years earlier or 15 years earlier. So yeah, that's that's pretty fun for sure.
Absolutely. Let's do a quick little side here. Look at some stats for this era and how they compare all time and also to 2019 as we're looking at this year. Win percentage in this era, 50-point games, 71.6%. All time, that is 72.5. So kind of right in line there, a little bit less than the all time numbers. Compared to this year, which I think is going to be an interesting case when we eventually do look at this year's 50-point games. This year, win percentage in 50-point games, 57.1%. Like almost,
yes.
Like you're almost not guaranteed a win if one of your players scores 50 points. And given the streak that Devin Booker's on right now, like we could maybe see that thing get to, really close to 50%. I'm hoping for under 50% because that would just be an incredible topic to talk about is like, you score 50 and you might lose more often than not. So,
yeah. And by the way, by this year, we mean 2019 for the
correct. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But yeah.
Yes,
not 1978. Yeah. No, this,
right.
by 2019. Sorry. Position wise, for this era that we're talking about, these 1975 to 1986, forwards dominate a little bit here. They have 16 of these 50-point games. Also, forward guards, as designated by Basketball Reference, they have 12, and guard forwards 10. Guards, just simple guards, 10. Center forwards 8. So again, not pure centers, but kind of swingmen there. Centers forwards 8. Small forwards 3. Shooting guards 2. Centers, just pure centers 2, and then forward centers 2. So I think this is an interesting one because for the first time, really. It is not the big men now. It is now the guards, the shooters, the small forwards or whatnot. But we're going to talk about it a little bit though, because it wasn't because they were just shooting more threes or, obviously with the 3-point line, coming in soon, or the ABA obviously having the 3-point line. It's not really that, because we're going to talk about the 3 points made in the era. They're not very high. It's just for whatever reason, maybe less dominant big men, more, scoring from all across the court. But yeah, it has become now sort of the forward guard, dominant, scoring era versus the centers really just, lop it in there to Wilt or whoever and let him kind of dominate. Those days are over. True shooting percentage in this era, the 1975 to 86, 70.86. True shooting percentage all time, 66%. And then true shooting in 2019, 71.53. So this actually falls more in line. This era falls more in line with what we're seeing right now with true shooting percentage versus what it does all time. The points, I just wanted to see how many, obviously they scored 50 plus, but how much above 50 plus. In this era, 53.4. So just about 3.4 points over the 50-point threshold. All time, 54.1. And this year, 2019, 54.2 is your points per game average. So I find it interesting that the 2019 and all time numbers are almost identical, and this year is about 1 point below that. But not much deviation though. People can kind of stick towards that 50. Total rebounds in this era. We mentioned a few games where there were no rebounds. 8.9 rebounds per game in 50-point scores in this era. All time 12.84. Obviously propped up by guys like a Wilt and Kareem and those sort of guys and your big men. Because 2019 we see that number fall back pretty much to what it was in this era as well at 8.5. So 8 is kind of what it was, in 2019 and what it is in this era as well. Assists per games in this era 3.7. Assists per game in 50-point games all time 4.2. And this year we see a huge little increase there with 5.8 on 2019. Now this one was really interesting. 3-pointers made in this era, 1975 to 1986, 0.4. 0.4 3-pointers made in this era of 50-point games. All time that number rises. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, and obviously, up until 80, there are no 3-pointers in the NBA. There are a few, there's a few ABA games where that would qualify, but that would, pre 1980, that wouldn't be a thing in the NBA.
Exactly, yeah, and even when the 3-point line is there, people still are kind of like, I don't know, it's a risky shot all the way back there. Like I'm kind of good. So even though they had the ability to, and we talk even about these ABA games, some of these ABA games where there were a few 3-pointers made, but it was like two, one or two were made. We're not that many here. All time though, of course, this is going to rise up a bunch with the proliferation of the 3-point line. 3.1 3-pointers made all time, and then 2019 we see that number spike all the way to 5.9 3-pointers made in 50-point games. And then lastly, average age in this era, 1975 to 86, 26.1 is your average age of your 50-point scorers. All time, 26.3. So it kind of falls right in line with where we see that. This year, a little older, 2019, 28.4 this year for 50-plus point games. So that number could go down a little bit more again with Devin Booker kind of coming in there, but scoring a bunch at a younger age. But I find that kind of interesting that 2019, 28.4 is your average age for 50-point games, where 26 was kind of the norm for this era and all time as well.
Yes. Also, just looking at the 3-point attempts in all of the NBA games post 1980, there were only 2 instances where there were more than 5 attempts in a game, where Purvis Short and Larry Bird did so. So in most of them, there are either 0, 1, or 2 attempts. So it definitely, still fits what you were saying there, where it's extremely rare, except for a couple games where 3-pointers are making any kind of difference.
Yeah, and the line's there, but people are just not doing it.
Right.
It's funny when you go back, like now, because your brain is so used to like our modern NBA, but you go back and watch a game from the 80s, and you'll see like a guy standing at the line, but then he gets the pass and he's like wide open, then he like takes 2 steps up and takes a shot, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, just take the 3. But I get it. Like, it's if you're not trained that way, you're not ready for it, and you got a coach that's like, it's not a good shot, don't do that. Like, it's just, but it's hilarious to see like in modern like you imagine the coach would be so upset if this player like had an open shot at the 3-point line and then went in like 4 steps to like a mid-range jumper. And usually they make them because like these guys were great at mid-range jumpers, but it's just like, you can imagine coach is throwing out his clipboard now and being like, God damn it, what are you doing? Like, take that 3-pointer. But it's fascinating.
Definitely, yeah. So, wanted to get a little bit in John Williamson, because he's just kind of a fascinating character in during this time. He began his career as a star on the ABA Nets teams that won titles in 74 and 76. He was a burly physical guard, described by Stan Simpson of the Hartford Courant as stocky and cocky. The 6'2" Super John had the muscular body of a fullback and the swagger of someone who thought he was the baddest man on the court. He had a shoot first, ask questions later mentality of scoring. And in Game 6 of the 1976 ABA Finals, he scored 16 points in the fourth quarter to seal a comeback win for the Nets against the Nuggets to give them the final ABA championship. Super John was his nickname, apparently a self-given nickname, although there are mixed reports on this. But honestly, I think
I don't like the self-given nicknames. I don't.
I think in this case, I think you have to be the exact right amount of cool to be able to pull this off.
That's fair. Okay.
It's sort of the combination of just the audacity versus the kind of the self-delusion plus the the swagger that you have, and I think Super John is an exception to the don't give yourself a nickname rule corollary. So we can disagree on that. But
I guess I'll allow it. No, I'll allow it for him, I suppose. I'm saying I guess I am nowhere near cool enough to give myself a nickname, but
right.
Okay, I'll allow it for old Super John here. So
I think I think of Super John as sort of like a better version of Dion Waiters. So I guess it depends on how you would feel about Dion Waiters giving himself a nickname. So I
would probably accept
that.
it if Dion Waiters gave himself a nickname, because it seems so bizarre, right. And he's such a weirdo that that would kind of weirdo in a good way. So I guess
right.
Okay, that's a good. Okay, you've won me over. Super John it is. So
fair enough.
Congratulations, Super John.
So and then in he stuck with the Nets through the merger in the NBA. Of course, they would lose Julius Erving. And then one day after Roy Bowe, the Nets owner, sold the team, and Super John was, this is from the New York Daily News, talking about some bizarre moments in Nets history. Super John was unpleasantly surprised to read in the Star Ledger that he was one of the lowest paid Nets. Sitting in a stool, growing angry by the moment, he threw down the newspaper and suddenly hurled an ice pack at the unsuspecting general manager. Months later, he ended up gaining a lot of weight and was shipped to a fat farm under the care of a trainer named Jack Spratt. So some disagreements there. Then he was traded from the Nets to the Pacers, clashed, not surprisingly, with the Indiana coach Slick Leonard, walked out in the middle of a game in 1977. So In 78, he ended up being traded from the Pacers back to the Nets, who had gone from New York to New Jersey. Then this is when he went on, he had a 50-plus point game and just went like on an incredibly weird scoring binge in his time with the Nets. He averaged 25.9 field goal attempts a game in 33 games, shot 45%, so not too bad. And this is a team with Bernard King, by the way, who, of course, would not afraid to take a lot of shots even early on in his career.
Certainly not.
But the only players who have averaged more field goal attempts in a full season. Now, granted, this is only 33 games, but still, this is looking at this list of guys who've taken this many shots over a full season. Tiny Archibald, Rick Barry, Elgin Baylor, Kobe Bryant, Wilt Chamberlain, Joe Fulks, Elvin Hayes, Allen Iverson, Michael Jordan, Pete Maravich, Bob McAdoo, Charlie Scott, and Jack Twyman. So some gunners there. So some really underappreciated company in terms of, amount of shots he took during that time. And he averaged 29.5 points per game during that stretch. So interesting point in his career.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I like those. That's a pure list of gunners right there too. That's a hell of a team. I like that team. Right. That'd be a fun little team to watch. But it is unquestioned gunners throughout history right there. So
yeah, and he definitely had something against the Pacers because he also had 38 in the other game that he played against the Pacers there. So he definitely wanted to, show up Slick Leonard, I would imagine. During that
we all would want to,
Yeah, no, I get it. So, and then in 79, he ended up getting into a brawl during practice with newcomer Mike Newlin, of course, who would have his own 50-plus point game with the Nets there. And things kind of went sour with the Nets as he was there only until mid-1980. Then had a short stint with the Bullets as he was out of the league at age 29. He gained weight and was out of playing shape. And there's a article from the LA Times 1987 that really kind of shows he had the sad point that he reached in his career. It was cut short by contract squabbles and weight problems. With it went the 20-room luxury home and Mercedes-Benz. Now 34, Williamson, wife Bertha, and 4 children leave 3 blocks from the projects. He grew up with 10 brothers and sisters. A broken down car sits in the driveway. So sort of a sad situation for him there. And then in 1996, he ended up passing away at age 45 of kidney failure. So was survived by his wife and his 4 children. So unfortunately, a sad post-playing career for Super John, but he certainly got in a lot of on and off the court antics during his career. He packed a lot into a short career.
Absolutely, yeah.
So 1979 is only 3 instances of 50-plus point games here. It's the first time since 1954 that no single player had more than one. Also the fewest number of 50-plus point games since 1958, but in 58 there were only 300 regular season games. In 79 there were 902. So many more instances to not only have a few have such a low rate. And in 57, this was the lowest rate since 57, in which there were 0 points, 50-plus point games in that time. So only 3 players do so, and 2 of them are new members in the club.
Absolutely. Let's talk about those guys right now. So you have number 1, Truck Robinson. We'll talk about him. He started his career as a role player on the Bullets teams, emerged in 1977, splitting time with Washington and Atlanta before going over to the Jazz as a free agent. 2-time All-Star in 1978 and 81. Also one-time All-NBA first team in 1978. Led the NBA in rebounding per game, 15.7 in 1978, becoming the first true forward to do so since Harry Gallatin in 1954. So it's been quite a while since a forward had done that. Also the 18th most minutes played in any NBA or ABA season in 1978 when he had 3,638. That is a lot of seasons, or a lot of minutes, I should say. Things didn't go great in New Orleans for several reasons, including a feud with Pistol Pete. That's not a good thing if you're going to be on the New Orleans Jazz. So he pushed for a trade to Phoenix, who at that time had Walter Davis, Alvin Adams, Paul Westphal, and Don Bussey. So they had a pretty good team there. And then there's a quote here from an SI Vault article from 1979. Said Robinson will hardly miss the Jazz since he made it clear last summer that he wanted to go elsewhere. Much of what was made was his feud with Pete Maravich. That came about when Robinson's agent, Don Cronson, was seeking to renegotiate Truck's contract. Said the Jazz have 2 set of rules, one for Pete and one for the rest of the players. Robinson said, I came into the situation where Maravich was all the people knew. Pete, Pete, Pete. You couldn't name 5 players on the Jazz before I got there. It was Pete and the rest of the Jazz. All of a sudden, I come in, a black player from the South, and it's Pete and Truck. A lot of people didn't care for that. So he was one of 4 players to be traded during a season, which they scored 50 points. The others are Wilt Chamberlain, Carmelo Anthony, and Mo Williams. So that's an illustrious list of players, and also Mo Williams. He was traded for Ron Lee, who led the NBA in steals at that time. Marty Byers, 2 first-round picks, and $500,000. He helped the Suns remain a contender in the early 80s. The Suns were 1 game from the NBA Finals in 1979 and had the best record in the West in 1981. But his departure with Phoenix was filled with some acrimony as he was traded to the Knicks for Maurice Lucas. This also is from an NBA.com article about the history of the Suns and the history of the Robinson trade. I said Robinson left little doubt in reporters' minds after Game 4 that he wanted out of Phoenix. After a month of attempting to strike deals with as many as 6 NBA clubs, Suns general manager Jerry Colangelo finally hit pay dirt on July 7th. He said Maurice Lucas plays a true power inside game. That's something we haven't had. I'm only dealing in reality, not in speculation. The reality is that we now have a strong inside player. So Colangelo throwing some shade there at old Truck. He finished his career with the Knicks and reunited with Hawks coach Hubie Brown, including the 1984 team that starred the aforementioned Bernard King, as well as Bill Cartwright, Rory Sparrow, and Ray Williams. Unfortunately, that came during a decline in his numbers, and Knick fans would all often chant "dump Truck" at Truck Robinson. So an interesting career interesting career started and stopped. A lot of good stops and a lot of good, but yeah, it was just issues with New Orleans, issues with Phoenix, just kind of issues in many different places, unfortunately, for Truck Robinson. But ultimately a pretty good career. And a man, I have his autograph. I met him at I was at a golf tournament once. It was like a celebrity golf tournament, and I just, this massive man pulls up, and it's Truck Robinson. I know nothing. I'm like 12 years old. I know nothing about Truck Robinson. My dad knew who he was, though. So he's like, I'll get that guy's autograph. I'll tell you about him later. I'm like, all right. And then I actually learned a lot about Truck Robinson afterwards. But very nice man, very large man, too. Just an unbelievably large human being, especially as a 12-year, in terms of height and girth, and just a big man. Truck is certainly a good name for him.
Yeah, and he was only only 6'7". He was fairly undersized for he was, I guess, a little bit like Charles Barkley, where he was short but just was massive and able to, of course, was a very good rebounder. In that game in November of '78, he had 51 points, 16 rebounds, and 80 true shooting percentage. So high up there, obviously. And John Drew was the other member of the First Timers Club. We've talked about him quite a bit before, but one note I thought was interesting is that he finished his career 49th all time in points per game at 20.69. So that's he finished, even though it was a short career, you finish a relatively short career, you finish in the top 15 points per game. That's pretty good in NBA history. So. And then George Gervin would have another 50-plus point game in his for the Spurs, of course, and against the Clippers. And those are the only 3 for that season. So definitely not quite as noteworthy as the previous season.
No. We're starting to slow down a little bit too in terms of the numbers there, which is not many ones, but it'll ramp up a little bit here in 1980. So all is well here in a minute. So.
Yes, so we have a lot of newcomers to the club. We have Adrian Dantley, Mike Newlin, Freeman Williams, and Larry Kennan, who all have 50-plus point games. Dantley's was the first in Utah Jazz history after the move. Of course, they had several in New Orleans. Newlin's we've talked about before, happening with the Nets. And Freeman Williams also, I think we talked about in the prior episode of Unlikely Names to do so. He was the first for the Clippers after the move from Buffalo. And for Larry Kennan, he played for the Spurs at the time. He was known as Special K, although his other nicknames are listed as K, Dr. K, Mr. K, Big Cat, and Super K. So he was a rookie on the 1974 Nets title team, and among 2 trades between the Nets and the Spurs in '76, in which 8 players changed uniforms. And although the Nets were able to win a championship in '76, the Spurs had several key pieces, including Kennan, who ended up becoming part of their stout late '70s, early '80s teams. He shares the NBA record for most steals in a game, 11 with Kendall Gill, and had a very rare points, rebounds, steals triple-double. As a 6'9" forward, he was a 5-time All-Star. Very good player. His first 7 seasons averaged 19.7 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, 1.5 steals on 53 true shooting. So you kind of prorate that career. You definitely as a a case for the Hall of Fame, but really fell off a cliff, unfortunately, after signing with the Bulls only at age 28 in the 1981 season. Was out of the league 2 years after. That came after he and Gervin averaged more than 20 points per game in 4 years as teammates. So not really any reason I could really find that he really fell off. In particular, obviously with players in that area, you think of drug issues, but I didn't really find anything regarding that. He just kind of fell off for whatever reason. So no real super injury that I could see either. Just sort of just faded for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, the Bulls will do that too.
It happens.
So.
It happens. Yeah, especially that era. Yeah. Then the other guys who had 50-plus point games, we talked about Dantley, and also George Gervin had his fifth of his career only at age 27. So definitely. Also, he had 55 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. So a lot of fives there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. So looking into 1981, we have 6 in that season as well. Adrian Dantley has another one. And then another first-timer new to the club, Billy Knight, who has his first 50-plus for the Pacers in the NBA.
Yeah, so Billy Knight's a little bit about him. The name might ring a bell to you. We'll get to that in a sec, of why most people listening to this probably know about him, but was a player as well, a scoring star, one-time All-NBA first team, two-time All-Star for the Pacers in their final 2 ABA seasons, as well as their first NBA season. As a rookie, he helped the Pacers reach the ABA Finals for the first time in 1975. Twice finished second in the league in scoring, which that stinks. Twice the second in the league, but never as good. But was traded to the Braves for Rookie of the Year Adrian Dantley after a contract dispute. He then went to Boston in the big Celtics-Braves franchise swap, where the owners traded teams, and the Braves went to San Diego and became the Clippers. Only 40 games played for Boston before being reacquired by the Pacers in 1978 for Rick Roby. Did not go too great. He said, I never told people how I felt, but obviously I wasn't enjoying myself. I didn't enjoy sitting on the bench. Once it started, I always wanted to leave. Bob Ryan, in his autobiography, said Knight was a finesse player on offense and a non-factor in every other facet of the game. He didn't defend, he didn't pass, and he didn't appear to work up a sweat, ever. So, not great, but he was named the NBA Player of the Week after his 52-point game against the Spurs. He never put up big numbers or minutes in his early career, though he played 4.5 more seasons with the Pacers before finishing up his career with some short stints on the Kings and the Spurs. He worked in the front office with the Pacers and the Grizzlies before becoming GM of the Hawks in 2002, leading their vaunted rebuilding effort, and fell in love with forwards. And unfortunately, Jason, sorry, he picked Marvin Williams over Chris Paul, but he did get Al Horford too, so.
Yeah, we'll give him that.
But yeah, he definitely chose Marvin Williams over Chris Paul. But hey.
Yeah, and Sheldon Williams over Brandon Roy. Yeah, so not
Sheldon
not
Williams. I forgot about
there.
Sheldon Williams.
Yeah, so
not great. Hey, Marvin Williams is still playing and still okay. But yeah, you probably would have rather had Chris Paul, but that's fine.
Yeah,
that one doesn't look as bad though. I mean, now that yes, for the Hawks it still looks terrible. But it took like 5 or 6 years. But Marvin Williams got his career together pretty well. But no, he's definitely not Chris Paul.
Yeah. No, definitely not Chris Paul. No. So the other players who get their first this season, Bernard King and Moses Malone. And of course Bernard would have 8 total in his career, 6 during this era. Adrian Dantley, and that was on January 3rd, 1981. Just a few days later, Adrian Dantley has 51, 5, and 7. And then he ends up, he's 20 of 25 from the field, 11 of 11 from the free throw line, and he ends up breaking Wilt's NBA record for true shooting percentage in a 50-point game. There were a couple of ABA ones that were higher. This lasts through 1995, as we talked about. And then Dantley again has 55 points just about a month later in February of 81. And Moses Malone has 2, he has 1 to cap off the season at the end of the season, 51 and 19, the first 50 of his career. We would have 4 total, and then we'll have one in the next season, but we'll talk about that one in a little bit. But yes, so again, we have 6 in the 81 season, and then and then in the 82 season, we are new to the club, only 1 member, Ray Williams.
Yeah, Ray Williams, our only one, the younger brother of Gus Williams, who we mentioned earlier on this show. He was a New York high school star. Was drafted 10th overall by the Knicks in 1977, which is good. It's good to stay home. Spent his first 4 seasons there and averaged 20.9 points per game, 5.0 rebounds per game, and 6.2 assists per game in 1980. He's one of 33 players who have averaged 25 and 6 in a season. In 1981, he helped lead the Knicks to their first 50-win season since 1973, and unfortunately their last until 1989. He was joined by Bill Cartwright and Michael Ray Richardson on that team as well. Got his 52-point game in his only season with the Nets, where he had signed as a free agent. The Knicks got Maurice Lucas as compensation. You're an NBA Player of the Week during that week as well, when he scored the 52. He then spent a year with the Kings before returning to the Knicks for the 1984 season. He helped lead them to the playoffs behind Bernard King. Bernard King's antics and Bernard King really kind of being the leader of that team. He then bounced around the league after age 30, stints with the Celtics, the Hawks, and the Spurs, and one more time with the Nets. Unfortunately, though, he had a lot of post-career financial struggles. A Boston Globe profile revealed that he was unemployed and homeless in Florida. He did find work again with the city of Mount Vernon, New York, and got back on his feet, but unfortunately in 2013 died at age 58. So an unfortunate kind of end to Ray Williams' career, but I guess he got himself back on track there in the final few years of his life. But unfortunate there, but always has a few big years there, and that 1984 season definitely stands out as one that Bernard King was really the star, but Ray Williams is definitely a guy who was there and doing some good work for them as well.
Yeah, and Cartwright and Choke Robinson we talked about earlier. Yeah. They had a lot of good players for this. And the 81 team was kind of a fun little blip. We talked about that during our Michael Ray Richardson episode. But Williams was he was a key part of that. It looked like he was kind of an emerging star, as we said. He had some pretty big numbers early on, and then just kind of faded again later on in his career. Though he had some pretty good contributions here and there. I liked how he was tied to some other names we've talked about earlier, like Maurice Lucas. He was also traded for Billy Knight, who's part of that Kings trade to the Knicks. Also involved Billy Knight being shipped off as well. So a lot of the names that are talked about in here are connecting with each other.
Yeah, it's strange. Every time we keep mentioning like the same, like Maurice Lucas and Gus Williams and Truck Robinson, right. and Adrian Dantley's traded for everybody like every year. Right. It's just that
exactly.
It's pretty interesting.
Yes, that's a fun one. So the games in 82, Moses Malone, 53 points and 22 rebounds in February of 1982. There's actually almost a 9-month gap between 50-plus point games. As the first one's very late in 82. And this was the last 50-20 game before the year 2000. So we got 18 years without that. George Gervin has the last 50-point game of his career in March of 1982. He was at that point. He was almost 30 years old, so I guess at that point it's sort of guys declined a little bit earlier on in his career during that era, so that makes sense. Adrian Dantley at only age 26 has his fifth 50-plus point game, and then as we talked about, Ray Williams having his in April of 82, so very near the end of the season, and he was the 70th player to cross the 50-plus point threshold. So interesting stuff there.
Absolutely.
And then in 83, we've got several new players, as 3 of the 4 players are new to the club. We have Larry Bird, you might have heard of.
I've heard,
Joe Barry,
I have.
Yeah, right. Joe Barry Carroll, and then Kelly Tribuca.
Yes, let's talk about Kelly Tribuca a little bit. Well, selected 12th overall by the Detroit Pistons, 1981 draft. Same draft as your favorite player of all time and your favorite executive of all time, Danny Ainge. So,
definitely.
Make sure we get a Danny Ainge reference in there. I know you're wearing your Danny Ainge jersey right now. Suns, right? Today is your Danny Ainge Suns jersey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's in the rotation.
I know your Trailblazers one has a stain on it, but you're luckily right, which is weird because it's black, but it's just right on that little white stripe. But you're doing what you can.
Yeah,
you're gonna wash it. You'll have it on next time, I'm sure. But Tribuca, along with Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer, helped lead the 1984 Pistons to their first playoff appearance since 1977. This kicked off a 9-year playoff streak that featured 3 NBA Finals appearances and 2 titles. Tribuca, kind of an unheralded part of that team as well. He scored 20-plus per game in 4 of his first 5 seasons with Detroit, and then also 19.1 in the one that missed out. So that hardly seems fair. So I'm just going to count him as all. So we're going to give him 1 extra point in that season. And yes, he scored 20 points per game in all of his seasons with Detroit. We'll go with that. He's one of 6 Pistons to have 40 or more in a playoff game as well, joining Dave Bing, Isaiah Thomas, Jerry Stackhouse, Chauncey Billups, and Rip Hamilton. Unfortunately, though, Tripucka would not be with the Pistons when they made their trips to the finals. So I'm mentioning all this stuff about them going to the finals, but that does not include Tripucka because unfortunately he and Kent Benson were traded to the Utah Jazz in 1986 for who else but Adrian fucking Dantley, because of course everybody is traded for Adrian Dantley at some point, and also future draft picks as well. So yeah, there's the same 7 people just traded for each other every year for like the first 10 years of this decade here. But like Detroit, Tripucka was going to a budding contender, but couldn't really find his fit, though, as Stockton and Malone had really kind of emerged as the keys to Utah, and Tripucka was just kind of an additional part that they really, unfortunately, couldn't really find a good use for. He had been a consistent great scorer with Detroit, but averaged only 9.1 points per game during his 2 seasons in Utah, so it's pretty disappointing there. In 1988, Utah traded Tripucka to the expansion Charlotte Hornets. He immediately returned to form. He scored 22.8 points per game, or 22.6 points per game. Unfortunately, the Hornets are pretty not good at this point, because they're an expansion team, and when you have to rely on Kelly Tripucka to be your one and only scorer, probably not going to be a good thing, but hey, it kind of worked. Well, in 1989, this is a fun little anecdote here. He played against Utah. Karl Malone had wrote Frank on his shoes because it was an homage to the recently resigned Frank Layden, who had just resigned a few days prior. Tripucka, who obviously did not enjoy his time in Utah, wrote Dick on his shoe. To be fair, the Hornets coach at the time was a man named Dick Harder, which is an all-time great name, by the way. Why would you not go by Richard? But anyway, Dick Harder. That's a tough one.
Different time.
So, I mean, yes, he was writing it to, as an homage to his coach, Dick, but I think Kelly was double dipping there a little bit, right? Like, I think it just so happened to be convenient that his coach was named Dick, but, why not go by Richard Harder? You know what I mean? Like, no one's going to ever Rich Harder. That's fine.
Yeah.
Why would you go by Dick? Like, unbelievable. Anyway, Tripucka retired after 2 years with the Hornets. So yeah, he had enough of that losing there. But what's interesting though is, like, if you want your team to be good for the next decade, you should get Kelly Tripucka, because like he'll come, he'll play, and then like he'll leave, and then you guys could be really, really good for a while after that. It's kind of what it seemed like the Kelly Tripucka thing was for a while there.
Yes. So, a few highlights from '83. Adrian Dantley, 57 points, has his last 50-plus point game, his career high. He ended up with more 50-plus for the Jazz than Karl Malone did, which I thought was kind of interesting there. And then, as we mentioned, Tripucka, Joe Barry Carroll, and then Larry Bird in March of 1983. And he was already 26 years old by the time he had his first 50-plus game, which I thought was interesting. Of course, he started kind of late, too, so that makes some sense. But he was the fourth Larry after Larry Jones, Larry Kennan, and Larry Miller to score 50-plus in a game. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Does Larry Hughes ever? I don't think Larry Hughes ever pops up again, so I think unfortunately Larrys are going to wind down a little bit, just like our Georges. These good old classic names, Larry and George. There.
Yeah. Yes. And then, speaking of a classic name, new to the club in 1984, we have Kiki Vandeweghe and Purvis Short.
Great names, all-time great names here. We'll start with Kiki Vandeweghe, Ernest Maurice Vandeweghe III. I could not find an origin story for Kiki. Do you know offhand where the Kiki thing came from? I tried like hell and I cannot find it.
I do not know. I'm sure that one of our listeners must know, will tell us.
Please do.
Us at Over and Back NBA. Let us know if you can find that one.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything, unfortunately. But I like Kiki is a much better name than Ernest Maurice Vandeweghe III. But I don't know. I kind of like that. That'd be real distinguished. Yeah. He has like a handlebar mustache and a monocle. He's going out to the. But I guess Kiki sounds a little bit more contemporary there. But drafted 11th overall by the Dallas Mavericks in the 1980 draft. Refused to play with Dallas at that time and demanded a trade. They did. They acquiesced. They traded him. They traded him to Denver, and the 1981 pick that Denver gave up in that trade ended up being Rolando Blackman, who ended up leading Dallas to multiple playoff appearances, becoming one of the iconic players of the Mavericks, and 6 playoff trips with Rolando Blackman. So a pretty good deal for both ends then, I would say, because of course Kiki Vandeweghe would kick off and become a really good player all time for the Denver Nuggets as well. The first of Kiki's 50 points, career high 51, came in the highest scoring game in NBA history, which we talked about many times. 186-184 triple overtime game against the Pistons. His next 50-point game came January 1984 in a 163-155 win over the Spurs, which at that point had been the highest scoring regular season game of all time. We're going to get into a little bit more of these Doug Moe Nuggets here in a little bit with Alex English, who pops up next year. But
yes. You mean regulation games?
Regulation, not regular season. Sorry.
game.
Regulation games.
Yeah.
Is what I meant to say. After this, Vandeweghe moved to Portland in 1984. He teamed with Clyde Drexler to form a formidable Trailblazers team. Unfortunately, he had a career-altering back injury in 1988 and lost his starting job to Jerome Kersey. Then obviously Portland would go on to make their NBA Finals with Rick Adelman and whatnot. And Kiki would unfortunately not be a big part of that, of course, because of his injury. And despite his great career, he may be well known, or a little bit more known even to a lot of people listening to this, as an executive. He was the Nuggets general manager through the Carmelo Anthony era, and spent some time as the New Jersey Nets GM as well. And today he is the executive vice president of basketball operations for the NBA. So I think you only hear about him when there's suspensions going down, and I think he's the guy that has to rule on the suspensions, and I think he also rules on some other different plays and stuff. But you hear his name every so often when Draymond Green gets suspended, and he's the guy that has to hand down that suspension. I think that I remember Kiki getting a lot of mention during the Draymond Green is kicking everybody in the nuts thing going on a few years ago.
Yeah,
where Kiki had to rule on, all right, how are we going to suspend this guy for continuing to kick people in the nuts? Right. Which appeared to be unintentional, but had happened far too many times to be completely ignored. So right. Kiki had to get down and decide how to suspend him for that one. So
when you think of people kicking each other in the nuts, you think of Kiki.
Right, exactly. So it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah, so Kiki's first 50-plus point game actually was 51, 9, and 8, so flirting with a triple-double there. Purvis Short had one in January of 84, 57, and 15. This was the first of his career. We talked about him in our unlikely players to have 50-plus episode. And then Kiki had a second in January of 84. And then Bernard King has a couple in back-to-back games in January 31st, 84 and February 1st, 84. And was the first to do so for the Knicks in 1968, and then becomes the fifth player with back-to-back 50s, along with Wilt Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor, Rick Barry, and John Brisker. Some others have joined the list. We'll be compiling that whole list sometime in the future, because it's definitely an interesting one. And that's pretty much it for the 84 season.
Yeah, it's just not a lot. Yeah, there's just people aren't scoring.
Yeah,
we're trying. But...
So 85, Moses Malone, again, 51 and 17. Always is going to have a lot of rebounds in these situations. Purvis Short has another one, 59 and 5 with an 84 true shooting percentage in this game for the Warriors. He was 20 of 28 from the field and 4 of 6 from the free throw line. So this, I think, was one of the very few where, he was 4 of 6 from the 3-point line. So this was the he was 4 of 6 from 3 and 15 of 16 from the free throw line. That makes more sense. So
I like it the other way, though. I like it.
Yes.
That's an incredible. It's just all right, I guess he's launching. All right, let's go.
Yeah, I guess so. And then Bernard King has a few more. He, in fact, from November of 84 to February of 85, he has 3, including the first 60-point game since 1978, of course, the Gervin Thompson duel, and then the first Christmas 63rd on 50, and then joins the 5+ club with that one, and then February of 85, not long before the injury that unfortunately would derail his career. He would come back a few years later and have some success. But in 55, 11, and 13. And then with his 50-plus in 2 seasons, he actually more than doubled the Knicks franchise total from 4 to 9 at that point. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Yeah. And then Kevin McHale has the first of his career, 56, 16, and 4 with 3 blocks, 83 true shooting percentage. And then that sets a Celtics record, but then 9 days later, Larry Bird would break that with a 60, 7 and 3 performance. This was against the Hawks, but this was actually in New Orleans, and very famous video of the Hawks bench players just going nuts with some of the crazy shots that Larry Bird was hitting in that game. It's another one of the games. Well, actually, he was only 1 of 4 from 3 points in that game. There was another one later on in the next season where he's going to take a few 3-pointers. So
yeah, this is I think the only of McHale's career, correct? This 56,
yes.
First and only for McHale. So who again is an unlikely. I would consider him kind of an unlikely one too, because you don't see him as a dude that's just getting down for 50 points. Guy that just kind of he feels like a 22 points a game scorer. The guy just does a bunch of other stuff on the court, but not necessarily a guy who can explode for 50. But he did here. So
And he was capable of it, but again, with Bird and Parrish being in there and other scorers, they were a team where that wasn't going to happen a whole lot just because of the circumstance. If he played for like the Bullets or something, he probably would have had a few in his career.
Right, of course, yeah.
So our final year of looking into this era is 1986, and we have a few players notable new to the club. So two of them are going to be hugely familiar names that we're going to go to in the next era, Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan. And the other, definitely a familiar name, although not quite as many, but interesting point of his career for him to accomplish this, Alex English.
Yeah, let's talk about Alex English a little bit. You've heard of Dominique, and I think you know about that Michael Jordan guy. So let's go on to Alex English here. Averaged only 10.8 points per game his first 3 seasons in the league. He was with Milwaukee and Indiana. Milwaukee at that point, a very good team as well. So it's kind of interesting when you see, like, if you ever go look at rosters and you're like, Alex English, like, he's on that team? Like, what the hell? Like, that should be great. But he wasn't really, I mean, they were good, but he wasn't, as what he would become. He'd move on to the high-powered offensive Denver Nuggets and become one of the most prolific scorers in the NBA in this era and really in the NBA history. We'll talk about it a little bit. Led the league in scoring in 1983, beating out teammate Kiki Vandeweghe by nearly 2 points per game. English also led the league in field goal attempts at 1,854, which is a full 286 field goals above second place Mark Aguirre that season as well. Even more incredible, though, English took only 12 three-pointers all year. So you think, oh my God, this guy's scoring all over the place. He's shooting all these shots. Like, of course, he's got to be shooting three-pointers. He was 2 of 12 from 3 that entire season. And he only made 18 three-pointers his entire NBA career, even though he played with the 3-point line during most of this era. But that's not what the Nuggets' high-powered offense was. You would think high-powered offense, yeah, three-pointers. No, not really. They were doing a bunch of other stuff. They were just running like crazy and shooting as quickly as they could, but not always 3-pointers. During his 10th season with the Nuggets, English played in 8 straight All-Star games and led Denver to 9 consecutive playoff berths as well. First player in history to string together 8 straight 2,000-point seasons as well. He is still the Nuggets' all-time leading scorer, also the Nuggets' all-time leader in games, minutes played, field goals, assists, and points per game. Known as Iron Man as well because he missed only 5 games between 1980 and 1990. And he, unfortunately, was the highest scoring player left off the 50 greatest players list in NBA history when they did it in 1996. So he was left off that list even though he was, the highest scoring player that that didn't make it there. And some fun facts about English: he had 3 books of his poetry published, and also during his playing days, he appeared in a movie called Amazing Grace and Chuck, a film about the threat of nuclear war that starred Gregory Peck and Jamie Lee Curtis. I don't think I've ever seen that, but now I kind of have to see it because Alex English is in it. So I don't know, is it good, or have you ever seen Amazing Grace and Chuck?
I have not. I'm going to imagine that it wasn't very good, but
stop.
Maybe.
Let me hold on a minute. Let's see what IMDb has to say about it. It's got Gregory Peck and Jamie Lee Curtis. Come on, there's no way it's bad.
Yeah.
Come on.
All right, fair enough. Well, while you're looking at that, I'll talk a little bit about just the games of that season. As we mentioned, Alex English, 54 and 4, and he becomes. He was one of the oldest to have their first 50-plus point game. He was 31, almost 32 at this point. So interesting that he had it so late in his career. Larry Bird has another one, 50, 11, and 5. And then Dominique has his first 2 in the first one is near the end of the regular season, April 10th, 86. He has 57. This actually ends up being his career high. And then in the playoffs, he has 50 and 5. He has the first 50-point playoff game since 1975, the 19th in NBA history. And then just one day later, Michael Jordan has 63 against the vaunted 1986 Celtics. Of course, we've have a whole episode talking about that game. It was the first 60-point playoff game since the 62 finals, and Jordan's first 50-plus point game, which is a little surprising that he hadn't had one. I mean, of course, it was only his second season. He'd been injured a lot of the season. The fact they didn't have one at a rookie, slightly surprising. But I guess, again, most rookies don't have that many. And he was sharing the ball a little bit with some other gunners. So, I guess given the context, a little bit less surprising. But he's going to have plenty coming up. So, he may have started off. He'll have a few.
Yeah, and that team was like, he came onto that team and there was some like old guys that were just like, nah, man, like there was, a little bit of tension there with the guys like Orlando Woolrich and Quentin Daly and those sort of guys that like, this young upstart Michael Jordan is going to come in and they know that he's going to like take their job and dominate this franchise. So I think there was also a thing too where if he just went out there and just became like an unabashed like gunner in a game, that he probably would have, I don't know, he would have gotten a stern talking to in the locker room after the game. And there's a reason why all those guys were jettisoned like immediately and then
Right.
the team was just handed over to Jordan. And then, of course, he's going to pop up a bunch more times. But I get it. He's kind of playing the political game there a little bit because, I don't think that'd be a good story for 21-year-old Michael Jordan to just go out there and just gun for 50 points on the team that he was on. But he would get there eventually after a few more years. So
Yeah, wouldn't take too long. So yes, he joined Bob Cousy, Billy Cunningham, Julius Erving, Roger Brown, and John Havlicek as players who had their first or only 50-plus points in the playoffs. And Sleepy Floyd would join them the next season, and that I believe is the complete list. So, interesting times there.
All right, so I have a little bit on this Amazing Grace and Chuck. It actually sounds like a pretty good movie. A 5.9 out of 10, though, so it doesn't sound very good. But essentially what it was is there is an American kid who's he's a Little League pitcher, and he takes a tour of a nuclear silo, and he decides that he is going to not play Little League baseball until the silo is shut down and nuclear weapons are disarmed. He doesn't want any nukes in his country, in his world. And then Boston Celtics player, Amazing Grace Smith, who is Alex English, hears about this and also does the same. I'm not going to play basketball until you disarm all the nuclear weapons. And then it's kind of one by one, and there's like these famous people not doing what they're going to do until nukes are disarmed. So it actually sounds like a pretty inspiring story. Yeah. That sounds pretty good. Apparently it's not that good, though. I don't know. Now I'm kind of interested about it, though. 5.9 out of 10, but it sounds like a good premise, so I'm into it. Red Auerbach's in it too, so that's good.
Oh well, yeah, there you go. Fred's in it. Obviously, that's with Red and Roundball acting that he did. Yeah, I'm sure he's.
I'm sure he's great. Yeah, I'm sure he's awesome.
Yeah. All right, well, this is the end of this era. Of course, we're going to be diving into the Michael Jordan era pretty soon, as he's going to be amassing quite a few of these, and other players, of course, are going to join him as well in the late 80s and into the late 90s. So that's going to be fun. Hopefully, everyone is enjoying this series. You can, of course, find us at the Step Back at fansided.com, and you can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. You can subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. We always appreciate a good rating and review and feedback from our listeners. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon.